Welcome. It has just gone 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Tuesday, the 18th of March, and you are watching episode 163 of Regional Wrap. Regional Wrap providing an insight of the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode, federal budget, a necessity or a nuisance, is my guest Gene Tunny. Gene originally hails from Townsville in North Queensland. But like so many of his era, he had to venture to Brisbane for his chosen university course and forge his career. He is the founder and director of Adept Economics, a Brisbane-based consultancy which specialises in economic modelling and cost-benefit analysis. He is also the president of the Economic Society of Australia, Queensland branch, and a director of Reimagine Australia, which provides early childhood practitioners with up-to-date information and tools to support young children with developmental delay or a disability together with their families. Gene is a former Australian Treasury official with experience in domestic and international issues. While at Treasury, he played a role in Australia's response to the global financial crisis, advising on debt policy and cash management. In his consulting practice, Gene regularly consults with a range of private and public sector clients, including the Commonwealth and state government agencies, such as the Australian Asbestos and Safety Eradication Agency, and the Queensland Office of Industrial Relations. Gene's consulting work is highly policy focused. Gene is a regular public speaker and participant in panel discussions. He has spoken at forums and conferences organised by CPA Australia, Advanced Cairns, West Australian and Queensland local government associations, and most recently, Advanced Cairns. He also appears frequently in state and national media, commenting on economic issues. Welcome, Gene.
Hello, Bill.
It's good to see you again. It's nearly 3 years since we last had you on the regional wrap.
Indeed, but we caught up in Cairns the other weekend, which was great because I was up there for the Advanced Cairns event.
So you weren't quite on your old stomping ground of Townsville. You missed it by
No.
about 380 kilometres. But before we move forward, can you give us a bit of an idea um, in regards to when you were younger and you headed off to Brisbane, why it was necessary to do that? And do you think it's still advantageous for people to seek opportunity in the big smoke and especially at more prestigious universities down in the southern capitals?
Oh, look, it's so long ago now, Bill. I mean, it's hard to sort of go back there. I mean, we moved down when I think it was 15 or so. So it's sort of, I mean, part of the reason my family did move down was because there's more opportunity in Brisbane, and I mean, I guess part of it was, it'd be good for me as well with university. Look, I whether it's necessary or not, there are a lot of good people who come out of JCU. I think in terms of getting a job, a graduate job, being like going to a uni in Brisbane, well, you're closer to potential employers. I think it's probably better in that regard. It's better if you want to get internships. Now everyone wants to get an internship. So I think there are definitely advantages in the big city, but look, there are plenty of people who still, plenty of good graduates come out of JCU. So I don't know if it's strictly necessary, but I think if you do maybe it depends on what you're studying too. If you're studying marine biology or environmental science, things that JCU is really renowned in, that's terrific. Economics, I think maybe you might have to do an internship down south or look for other opportunities. It's hard to say. I mean, a lot depends on. It doesn't a lot depends on the things you do other than going to uni. Uni matters a bit, but it's not completely decisive.
How did you find your trip to Cairns and speaking to for Advanced Cairns? Do you think
Uh,
that?
good, good. I mean, I think. it was there's a really active business community in Cairns. I get the sense that people are really motivated to really move things forward. And Jacinta Redden's very good. I think she's good at promoting the region. So I enjoyed learning about that. And Pete Faulkner had some great figures on just how much Cairns is really, how strong it's been going since the pandemic. After the pandemic, there was that period in the 2010s when things were a bit flat. There was a big overhang of construction of development, but now I mean the property market's gone strong. It's and also I think economically things have been going well with much lower unemployment. So I was really pleased to learn all of that good news, and yeah, I was. It was good to see just how committed I think that people are to advancing the region.
I think the other interesting thing that's got to happen, bud, is just as the housing problem caught up to Brisbane, we had after COVID, we had a lot of people come to Brisbane area and southeast in particular, but it certainly wasn't long before they put full sign up out the front. In other words, there was definitely get accommodation and rentals and housing and that. And that was fairly straight after COVID. 21, we allowed to start moving again, 22. And then regional Queensland benefited as Brisbane got full, more people were coming to the regions. And in 2023, there was a huge movement to the regions,
Mm.
but last year I noticed it stopped in its track, basically because the housing is an issue. It's almost impossible to get rental in Cairns and a lot of other regional places. And it's also, there's a lot more restrictions of what's available on the market. So I think that's got to impact in regards to some of the plans for growth, is the housing problem. But I don't know if Australia's got to get over that in any time soon.
No, well, look, I mean, as well as I do, I think we're facing a big challenge as a nation, as a state, achieving these housing targets. The federal government and the states have committed to having 1.2 million new homes by 2029. And at the current run rate, we're going to fall well short of that. I mean, at the moment in Queensland, I think, I mean, we have to basically do 240,000 per annum. With what we're doing at the moment, I mean, maybe we'll get to 170 or 180. So we're going to be well short of any of these targets. It's just too, there aren't enough places to develop, or we make it too hard to develop, or we don't have the labour. There are competing projects. There are a whole bunch of things that are making it difficult to reach those targets.
And the building standards don't help either. I mean, we've introduced some pretty rigorous building standards in regards to seven-star ratings for homes and things like that. Something that's completely wasted on North Queensland because that's we don't need a seven-star. We need something where we can open up the doors and windows and put the fans on and stuff like that for most of the time. Yeah, there's times when you need to close up and put the air conditioning on. But overall, we don't need those sort of standards. It seems ridiculous that we're a continent. We spread as big, far and wide as Europe or the United States, but we have these uniform policies come out, and it doesn't suit area to area. So it seems a bit of a waste and an additional cost. And now all this requirement to have oversized doorways and passageways, so almost every house has to be built for a disabled person, which adds anywhere between the seven-star rating and the disabled factor type thing. You're probably adding somewhere between $40,000 and $50,000 per unit for a three-bedroom house. So it starts to really add up and sort of
Yeah.
make it uneconomical to build properties.
Yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of estimates that have come out by people like HIA and master builders about how much all of these regulations and taxes and charges, what they're doing for the price of housing. And it's the case now that, I mean, well, at least in Brisbane, you can't build a two-bedroom unit, or if you want to develop a two-bedroom unit, you've got to sell it for over $1 million, right? So we just can't build affordable housing. And look, I think we've got to, it's the time has come where we've got to think about, well, one, immigration policy. I think we've had, this is something that was controversial when I raised it at the Advanced Cairns audience because, like, there are two aspects to immigration, right? I think there's definitely some role for skilled immigration whereby there may be some skill shortages that in regions that they need some, they may need some skilled people to fill. So that's what the Advanced Can sort of audience was concerned about. But what I see is I think a lot of it is just associated with unis. They're essentially, they're marketing themselves as a pathway to citizenship. And so we're getting, millions of people who've come in to to actually to study here, and some of we've got the attraction is, well, it's easier for citizenship, and this is and I don't have a problem with that. I think, look, we need to have some immigration, and they do, a lot of these immigrants are providing their additional labor, and they're working jobs that many Australians don't want to work. However, it's putting a lot of pressure on our cities and our services, and it's also driving up the price of housing. So that's one thing we've got to look at. The other thing I think we need to talk about is decentralisation policy, whether we need to look at new states, such as a state of North Queensland, where we can have a capital in Cairns or Townsville, and then we have professional jobs in those regions, and that can help, keep some of the young people in those regions.
I think another factor is also, besides some of the costs incurred with building the house, but also some of the problems in regards to the release of land
Yeah.
for new developments. And the other thing is also infilling. It's always the same. If someone wants to do a development in a city where there's already a population, and that it always comes to, I don't want my area to change. I don't want high rises. I don't want any trees lost or that. So there's a resistance there. And the other thing is it's very slow to open up new land because the cost structure in regards to for the local government versus the state contribution is always argumentative. And if you're going to have a new development, well, you've got to put in the drains, you've got to put in the sewage. I mean, a lot of that goes to the developer on the estate, but all the trunk connections are
Yeah.
still a responsibility of the state or local government or a combination of both. And they seem very much behind in regards to doing that infrastructure that is the responsibility of government. So there's a big delay there. And at the moment in Cairns, there's, like I said, they're building corridors down the south. But one of the biggest problems is our trunk sewage line will have to handle somewhere in excess of 20,000 households. Now that's a lot of put. So you need a lot extra plant in that. And unfortunately, being such a low-lying wet area, it's not overly conducive for gravity feeds and stuff like that. So a lot of the expense actually has to go in for pumpings and that. So
Mm.
that all adds to the expense, and it's like everything. Well, how long we can delay it? How long can we delay it? And then it sort of causes big headaches for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds yeah, I think you've diagnosed the problem well there, Bill. Yeah, absolutely. So look, yeah, clearly, yeah, we've got some challenges. I think this will be one of the, I mean, this is going to be one of the big issues going to the election. There's cost of living, related to that is housing, and because of all of these policy failures that are increasing the cost of housing, that make it very expensive, that mean we've got people can't find places to live, increasing homelessness. That's going to be a big issue in the upcoming election, I think.
Just casting your knowledge through the treasury sort of side of things.
Mm.
Prior to Alfred going down south, having a big wander down the coast, it was quite interesting that you had more reporters on the ground in Brisbane over the weekend before last than there's probably ever been before, all trying to beat up the story of terrible winds and conditions and that. And we're having a bit of a giggle up here, like it just managed to be a category one. And really the resources put into it was phenomenal in regards to the media. And I mean, we've never had the premier up here for a cyclone or the prime minister. But gee, you had casts of thousands.
Well, look, I don't want to have a. I don't know if there's a competition here. I mean, I think there were. It would have been, I mean, there was serious concern that if we had a cyclone hit Brisbane. I mean, Brisbane's the capital of Queensland, right? It's a major centre. I mean, 2 million people in the metro area. I mean, yeah, it could have had a very severe impact. Look, I can't, I don't know what, I mean, maybe the Premier should go up if there's a cyclone threatening Cairns or Townsville. The Premier probably should go up. I mean, I, I, I guess not being up there, I don't know how, I can't speak for how you felt about it. I mean, it did, some of it may have seemed a bit excessive. I think we started panicking too early. I mean, on the Monday night, there was already, I went to the Woolies and you couldn't get any bread or milk. Everyone had, people, as soon as they thought, oh, there's a cyclone potentially going to hit Brisbane, people ran to the shops and loaded up on bread and milk and baked beans, toilet paper, etc. So maybe there was a bit of an overreaction. But looks, there was significant flooding on the Gold Coast, and there were some people who lost power for a couple of days. So it's not as if there were, it was all a beat up. I think there was some reason to be concerned. Yeah, maybe I do take your point though. It looks like okay, like we do. Maybe we're treated a lot better than people in the regions. I mean, partly that's due to proximity. It's easy for the premier and the other ministers and the reporters to get to Brisbane and do the media crosses. It's more challenging to get to Cairns. But look, maybe the premier should go up there. I wouldn't have a problem with that.
I think the other thing that's interesting is how people view things and what information they think. Because I never rely on the Weather Bureau for any information because they just completely beat up everything. So just use the Joint Typhoon Warning Center detailing coming out of Hawaii from the United States Navy. And I mean, it basically just had the thing. It's after it started coming down past probably Rockhampton, it was definitely category one, category two, dropping away to a category one, and when it crossed it, it just made category one. But a lot of the damage was done well before that. I mean, I can't believe in this day and age we let trees get as big as 60 feet in your suburban areas that drop down on houses and cars and
Yeah.
across your power lines. I mean, that would have been a good portion of your damage. And I mean, that is completely preventable. I mean, that's just management. That's just local government,
Mm.
state government management. You don't need all those interruptions and you don't need all that damage caused by those big falling trees. Gum trees are bad enough anytime. They can just drop a 60 or a 70 or more uh, kilogram branch down on you and kill you. So it's something that should be better managed. But if it wasn't for that event, we would not have had a budget. So how do we stand now? We're going into the election was delayed. We're now going to have a budget. So how much validity does this budget really have as a well thought out good document or whatever? I mean, they might have had it sitting in the wing somewhere, but compared to when say a non-election year and you've got to deliver a budget, what do you think the final input to it was in regards to how good it will be as
Oh,
a
I mean,
doc?
it's probably as valid as any other budget. I mean, all they would have started the budget process months ago, early in the year, and started thinking about the types of budget measures they'd want. I mean, the process has been compressed, so they've lost given normally they have the budget what is it, the second Tuesday in
May?
May, yeah. Whereas now it's coming out the last Tuesday in March. or the second last or whatever, maybe no, last Tuesday in March. So yeah, certainly they've lost that they've compressed it, but I think there still would have been enough time to do a reasonable job on it. It's not I don't think it'll be particularly rushed. I think they would well no more than any other budget. So I'm not really concerned about that. I mean that and who knows? I mean, I don't know if there's actually a relationship. I mean, you can have a really long and extended process and, lots of discussion, lots of debate, and you can still end up with some pretty bad budget measures. I'm not sure whether it's, what the correlation there is, Bill, whether that's going to, I mean, I don't know to what extent it'll be that's an issue. I remember we produced an economic statement in a bit over 4 weeks in 2008-09, we started the updated economic forecast, the second Rudd stimulus package. There was some work that was already going on, that they had ideas of what a second stimulus package was, but the actual work on that really began first week of January, and then we had the budget statement out 3rd of February or something like that. So it's amazing what the government can do when it really puts its mind to things. I mean, you've got lots of resources, people work flat out, uh, people work hard, they're pretty dedicated, or they're very dedicated in Treasury and Finance. So personally, I'm not sure there's a real concern. The question is the judgment of the politicians, right? They're the ones who are making the decisions, okay? So regardless of the length of the process, it's ultimately up to their judgment how good this budget will be or how bad it will be.
If we do have a change of government, can the subsequent government sort of say, well, no, we'll scrap that one, or we'll put our own in the next few weeks? Is that a possibility, or
Uh,
you have to live with what you got?
oh, they can certainly make policy changes. It depends on whether the money's gone out the door yet or not. So, or uh, like there are things. So if the government introduce and I mean, it's possibly the case they could change things because there won't be time to get any. It'll all just be commitments, won't it? Because basically, Chalmers will hand down the budget next Tuesday, and if anything, they'll say, "Oh well, we'll have this commitment. We'll pay this money. Will come out, or it'll get paid at this date, or there'll be this tax cut, or whatever." But the money won't have actually flowed yet because they're going to go straight to an election. So yeah, it is possible that an incoming government could change it if they don't agree with something. Uh, so I mean, they could when they get in, they could make an announcement. We're going to do this, and they could make some policy changes without putting out a full budget. Like if you see, you would have seen what this incoming government here did. The state government, Janetsky, the incoming treasurer, had promised that they would cut stamp duty on new builds for first home buyers, and that's something that they brought about through an act of parliament. They changed, they changed the relevant revenue act. I forget which act it is, and so that's something that they're able to do. They didn't need to have that as part of the budget. So there are things that incoming government can do in the absence of a full economic statement. That can come later. They'll need probably need a few months to put that together. Remember when Albanese got in May 2022, and his budget, their first budget came out in October 2022. So in 2022, there are two budgets. There are two 22-23 budgets. There was the one that was put out by well,
Morrison.
yeah, Morrison and Frydenberg, and then there was the one that was put out by Chalmers.
Just when they go into caretaker mode,
Yeah.
uh, does that sort of hobble the bureaucracy from dealing out money for that period, or does everything just keep ticking along when they go into caretaker mode?
Well, they can't make. Yeah, that's a good question. They can't make. So you can't make new policy decisions. But a lot of the money that is scheduled to be paid or is entitled to be paid. I mean, Social Security keeps getting paid, right?
Yep.
Uh, tax refunds will get paid. If there's if the Commonwealth if there are contracts that the Commonwealth has and it's obligated to pay money under those contracts, it'll pay them. But typically what won't happen is that the government, like the public servants, won't make any significant expenditures of funds until there's a new government in power. So that there will be, they'll be, they will be constrained in what they can do, but still the basic functioning of the Commonwealth government will continue. But if yeah, but they probably they'd be careful not to enter into new contracts. Like it depends on the what discretion the different heads of department have regard what delegations they have from the minister, because they might have some authority to enter contracts, uh, and they'll make it. They probably have they may have internal policies. I can't remember, to be honest. But they'd use their judgment for sure. They'd realise, okay, we probably wouldn't enter into a major contract with a supplier to deliver a I don't know. Well, I mean, you're not going to buy new military equipment, for example, until you get the new minister in, I imagine. So, because you'd want to understand what their policy is. So, yeah, it will affect government, but most of, I think, the federal government will continue to go on.
I suppose it's a matter of the routine payments just go through, but there's
Yeah.
always possibly when a new minister comes into any department, they're going to have, let's start with a review.
Yes.
Let's hold up things for another 12 months or whatever. Seems to be their normal sort of MO. But just as a matter of interest, we've had this Labor government for just on 3 years, since May 22. So it'll be 3 years by the time they're out the door. Just can you just give us an overview of your feeling in regards to where people are economically and where the country is economically between, say, May 22 and where we are now? Are we better, worse, or what parameters do you think we've gone a bit askew with?
Right. Look, I would say relative to where we were, and I mean, what we've got to realise is that the government. I mean, I'm not necessarily. This is not necessarily a criticism of this government. This is, I mean, this is partly a reflection of the, the inflationary pressures that were sort of already building prior to Albanese getting elected, and that were related to just huge fiscal and monetary stimulus during the pandemic, and the implications of that, and also state governments across Australia ramping up infrastructure spending. So there's only so much you can blame the current government for, but they've had the bad luck, and I mean maybe some of it's we can blame them for a few things. So we can talk about that a bit later. They've had the bad luck of being in government when we've had this big cut in our real net disposable income. So there's some statistics from the OECD which show that we've basically had the largest fall in real household disposable income in the OECD in the advanced economies, and it's got to do with the fact that we had nearly 2 years where we had inflation at a much higher rate than wages growth, which is meaning real wage reductions. And we also had the interest rate increase. And because people have got so much debt, mortgage debt, that really cut into their disposable income. So we've seen this big reduction in household living standards. We had the 7 quarters of negative per capita GDP growth. So we had the household recession, people called it. So even though the economy was growing, that's got to do with population growth. We've got immigration, we've got high population growth, and that's going to lead to a growth in recorded GDP. But at the same time, we've got GDP per person falling, and we've got households really doing it tough. So the government really, and this is why I think the government's struggling, and why it could be the first government since, was it the Scullin government in the 30s? Like basically the first government since the 1930s that could get thrown out after one term, and it's because people are suffering. There was that big inflation shock. Arguably, the government could have done more. It could have it could have restrained itself more on the spending side. Uh, Maybe it should have tightened up immigration as well earlier. There are all sorts of things maybe you could blame the government for. And some of it's a lot of it's bad luck, I think, in terms of when they got into government, and some of it's probably bad management. So that's what I'd say. I think the economy may, we've had economic growth, but it's been weak, and therefore we've had per capita GDP decline. That had turned around in the December quarter, and this is what everyone is sort of getting excited about. This is why Jim Chalmers is saying we've turned a corner. I mean, there are some good signs, but yeah, still we're behind where we were. I think I don't know. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but I think it was something in the order of a 9 or 10% decline in that real net disposable household income. That OECD measure. I can send you the numbers. You can put it in the show notes. It's a very significant hit, and that's why people are hurting.
Well, I think one of the other things is I've never been thrilled with government to overreact with stimulus packages. Um, we have a situation where the economy can be booming along and it keeps going on the rise and then something happens and then there's an overreaction. Instead of letting things naturally correct their course, um, the government jumps in and starts stimulating things. I mean, the GFC was a point in case.
Yeah,
There's nothing in that GFC spending that did anyone any good because I remember at the time had people looking at building houses, and in Victoria what happened is I think this feds threw in about pushed the first home grant up to about 30,000 from 15. The states I think sort of chucked in another 15 or so, got it up to about 45. And then
mm,
if you were in the regions, there was another bunch of money on top of that. So
yeah,
if you went out and built a house in Bendigo or Ballarat or something like that, I think they gave you about $62,000 towards your house. And
yeah,
in cities, it was about, I think it might have been over 30, heading towards 40 or whatever.
yeah,
But no one who built a house during that period was better off because everything went up. The cost of labour went up. The availability of materials got hard because everyone was trying to do it at the same time.
yeah,
So that 60,000, that just went on sort of other costs than that, and the homeowner didn't achieve any advantage, but the taxpayer got stung with this huge, massive amount of money taking out of general revenue. So
yeah,
that's one sort of stimulus that sometimes I think you just got to let some things ride. And of
yeah,
course, the other thing that happened was the big mass immigration Ponzi scheme in a reaction to the GSC turndown was just open the floodgates. I mean, we went from sort of 70 to 90,000 people coming in a year, and we rocketed up over the Rudd term. I think we got up to about 300,000 a year. Um,
I think we got
so
up to that just at the end of the Howard government, and then and then Rudd inherited that. So yeah, it wasn't just Rudd. I think it had started sort of before that. But yes, yeah, you're right.
yeah,
Yep,
yeah,
yep.
it did go up, but it didn't go anywhere
Mm.
to what by the time what Rudd got up to. But we're now in a situation after the COVID. Don't seem to have learnt from that. We again opened the floodgates and caused ourselves, bodily harm, as far as the hardships on the Australian people and the hardships it's delivering onto the budget.
Yeah, look, I agree with you. We've got some groups in the community who are very pro immigration. With the universities, they obviously want students, and then I mean maybe the building industry too. And until there's often the accusation that if you're anti-immigration, you're well. I mean, maybe their concerns are, oh, well, you're just racist. And I mean, I don't think it's about that at all. I think it's about maximising or making sure that Australians aren't worse off. I mean, like we're very generous. We've got a super generous immigration program. We'd have a very generous immigration program internationally, even at half of the numbers or a quarter, right? So, Uh, I think certainly we've got to manage that in our national interest a lot better than we have been doing.
I think one of the other things that sort of coming back to bite us is the lack of productivity. Um, and also the fact that our economy's changed to more and more of a service type industry rather than manufacturing, having manufacturing or white goods or manufacturing anything for that matter. But once you go into that service industry, the bulk of your cost is wages.
Yes.
So if you put up wages, right, you have to pass those costs on. And if you're not getting productivity gains in any sort of way by reducing the number of people delivering that same amount of service, it's inflationary. So is that a real big factor on inflation, the lack of productivity? And what's the other factors that have been playing a big part on inflation?
Oh, look, I think it makes it has some impact, I suppose. I mean, the biggest impact is just a huge increase in the amount of money the government stimulus packages at the same time that the Reserve Bank was engaging in its quantitative easing and all of the cheap money, additional credit, banks creating credit, banks lending money, all of the additional money in the economy. Too much money chasing too few goods is the classic definition of inflation. That's basically what we had happen. I mean, there's a famous quote from Milton Friedman that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. And yeah, you just look at the big spike in the amount of money in the economy, the cash that people had, particularly during COVID, right? I mean, people were withdrawing money from super. People, if you were a self-employed business person, you're getting all of this. You got a cash flow boost from the government. You got a lot of business people, small businesses got JobKeeper. A lot of corporates, I think corporates got it too, didn't they?
Yeah,
There
yeah.
was just all of this
Qantas did well.
money. Sorry?
Qantas did well.
Yeah, yeah. There was just all of this money that was injected into bank accounts, and then that led to a boom in spending post COVID, and too much money chasing too few goods. I mean, you were alluding to this before with the constraints in the building sector. You get all this additional money, but if there's issues with supply and it's not it's not elastic enough to respond to the additional demand, then the price is going to go up. This is a crowding out story, and it's the same with this is the inflation process too, because you've got all of this additional money, so much supply, so many transactions that can occur, and the prices go up. So I think that's the bigger part of the story. It's just too much money, really.
I think the other problem with that is it was too much money that went to some areas, and then a lot of people actually, went to the wall, like small businesses and things like that. Do you see any hope on the horizon for small businesses in regards to going forward? Because it seems that they haven't got having less and less ability to handle increased costs, whereas maybe the bigger players can handle it. But what sort of things do you think the budget should deliver to, say, make life easy for small business, which make up a good percent of our economy?
Oh, look, I mean, if I had the magic wand or the control of it, I mean, we really need to cut income taxes, really, or we need to get those tax rates down. I mean, a lot of the problems businesses get into are with the ATO ultimately. Um, we've got the ATO shutting down a lot of businesses. I think what happened during COVID, like there were issues with cash flow for a lot of businesses, and they ended up getting support, but they weren't paying tax. The tax office was letting a lot of small businesses build up uh, significant tax debt, and more recently, the ATO's been cracking down on that, and we've had a lot of businesses with, very significant tax debts, and they just haven't been able to get out of it, and they're having to wind up. I think that's a real problem. So I think we've got to reduce the tax burden overall. So income tax, company tax, that's going to require cuts in spending so you can So you're not just, but that's not going to happen, is it? So we know it's unrealistic. But that's what I find the biggest challenge is. I mean, dealing like as a business person myself, I find that just how I just know how harrowing it is every quarter having to make that BAS payment, and sometimes not knowing, finding it challenging to forecast what that's going to be, and then sometimes getting unexpectedly high BAS payments you have to make, and it just creates a lot of stress. And it'd be a lot easier if you had lower tax rates. You didn't have to sort of set aside so much to pay the tax man every quarter. So that's what I'd be.
Well,
Go ahead, Bill.
yeah. Yeah. Well, do you think we can stop the government's addiction to spending a little bit? I mean, that seems the problem. I mean, you've been in the economist area for a while. I think tax receipts, in the last 10 years have probably gone up a couple $100 billion per year. Um, we don't seem, the government doesn't seem to spend it any better than when they had less money. So maybe we need to, like you say, cut tax and that, give them less money to spend because they don't spend it well anyway.
Well, I mean, I think they seem to be spending it worse. I mean, things aren't getting any better. I mean, the amount that we have spent on all of these social security programs, but yet, I mean, we've got homelessness is worse than ever. Uh, the number of people we have on the streets who are clearly in mental distress. Some are going to be drug affected, but others just seem to be to have serious emotional or mental issues, and they're just wandering the streets. So in the Queen Street Mall, abusing people. It really is shocking. We've got a completely. I mean, look. I don't want to be too apocalyptic or too negative, but yeah, I think we're failing in we should be doing a lot better given how much we're spending. I think part of the problem is we're spending on the wrong things. There's a lot of churn. There's a lot of people paying taxes and getting money back from the government. There's middle class welfare, etc. There's also the NDIS. I mean, we all sort of support the NDIS because there, but for the grace of God, go I. The issue is with the rules about eligibility and then the way it's delivered with the private providers and the inability of the government to monitor all of the rorting and just lots of rorting, billions of dollars lost in rorting, eligibility that's possibly too generous in some areas, which means that we just spend that's growing at 20% per year, right? That's overtaking Medicare in spending.
Yeah,
That is
and
a
it's only
huge
600,000 people.
yeah, and that it's a huge challenge, huge fiscal challenge. But everyone signed. We signed up for that, and that's got bipartisan support. Um, so that's the type of thing they're going to have to look at. But I don't think they will. I mean, I don't think they've got that would require a lot of courage to really get that back on track.
Very courageous of you, Minister. I think
Yeah, yeah,
I think
exactly.
that's the term. If anyone taking it on, I mean, some of these big schemes. It goes back to childcare and that. I mean, it just these big multi-government, big bucks industries just a feeding ground for people who just take advantage of it and aren't scrupulous in that. I mean, we saw that with the childcare industry when that started off. It's got a little bit better, I suppose, but the biggest problem is ridiculous sort of regulations they put on in regards to you got to have these sort of qualified people, so many
Yeah.
qualified people to do something. I mean, for thousands, if not millions of years, people have been looking after kids without a uni degree. I don't think see why we need to have a uni degree to look after kids in even creches and things like that. So there's a lot of over regulation and things that probably could make things a bit easier. But the other thing is, we're talking about people on the streets, who sort of obviously have mental issues. Well, that's come about basically because probably some of the institutions that we used to provide for them were, less than sort of conducive in regards to safe management of people. But I think we've improved a lot. I mean, I think there's probably a need to turn back and maybe go back to institutions in regards to provide for these people. Because I think the big thing was there was this feeling that we could put these people into the community in general, in odd houses here and there within the community or into their own accommodation. But the reality is these people cannot deal with the day-to-day stress of life. So
Yeah.
they do need the institutions, but it needs to be um, provided for by someone who's fully accountable, not some NGOs that are just they're the food at the trough.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's a big issue. I mean, you could have a whole session on that, and you probably need to get an expert on these issues. I just notice it. I mean, just in Brisbane, particularly since the pandemic. I mean, we're just seeing levels of homelessness and people in distress that we've never seen before. I mean, just I don't know. It's at least five times what it was uh, pre-pandemic, or I mean, 20 or 30 years ago, you'd never see it in Australia. I mean, maybe rare, maybe there'd be some rare sort of example. It's just becoming, really, it's just disturbing, and and I think a lot of people probably share the same view that it just speaks to a failure of government because we are paying a lot in taxes, and this is sort of a basic thing that the government should be doing, and it's just not doing it very well.
I think the other thing is it's sort of getting to a stage where how many people have to work to support one person who's not able to work for some reason, and it seems to be getting more and more that other people have to work and pay taxes to deliver for these individuals because the schemes that we've got. So I also I did notice probably about 2 years ago there was a lot of investments available. You get hit over the internet and that with people coming up saying we've got this opportunity, and I noticed there was a lot for NDIS accommodation where they're offering anything up to 15 to 20% return on your money if you invested in this set of units. Well, that just speaks in regards to, gee, how much are they slugging, the government to deliver those sort of things? And do we need to deliver four and five, three and four star accommodation for these people? Yes, we owe everyone a safety net, but it looks like in some instances we sort of have to provide a lifestyle, which probably gets up a lot of people's nose when they have a difficulty of putting food on the table and also paying their mortgages themselves.
Yep. So I think Bill Shorten was looking at some of the more outrageous examples of spending that was being subsidised by NDIS. I think there were people going on cruise ships or they were getting escorts or things like that. I think there were some really examples that really showed ill discipline in monitoring the spending. So I think they are trying to crack down on some of those things. I don't know about the accommodation example, Bill. I'll have to look that up to look into it.
I think that one of the biggest, obviously, the biggest percentage of jobs have been in the public sector,
Yeah.
either directly with government or providing a government service. And NDS seems to have been a big part in that uptake of employment, basically on the provider side. So there's a lot more people engaged with it, but I understand from some people involved in it that it's not a it's a lot better paying job than a lot of other jobs to just
Yeah.
be a carer for several hours a day, so many days a week, than actually go and getting a real productive job. So there's that attractiveness to it. So it is becoming a bit of a problem in regards to if they're sucking up such a big percentage of the workforce because it's uh, well paid compared to other jobs that we're going short on.
Yeah, I think there's something to that, Bill, and that could be a reason that could be behind the low productivity numbers too, because it's a sector where it's hard to get productivity improvements. If you're talking about personal care, you need the personal touch, you need the person there. helping out. So it's not really something where you're going to see productivity gains. So, yeah, I think you make some good points there.
So, out of this budget, what would you like to see in it that puts Australia in better stead, and people maybe looking for some relief and prosperity in the future? What would you put in the budget to sort of address some of the issues that we've got?
Well, again, I'd go back to trying to, reduce those tax rates. I'd have some significant tax cuts in the budget. At the same time, I would also commit to some significant savings on spending. I mean, this is why I'm not the person deciding on the budget, okay? Because I think what we need is to, cut those tax rates, cut the spending to get more resources into more productive activities, to give it back to taxpayers to make things easier for them, and to get some of these programs under control. NDIS we've got to get under control, and I'd be looking at. I mean, I wouldn't be. I think the federal government's going to, isn't it going to have almost like universal childcare or something? I mean,
Yeah, they're
I don't
just
think we can afford that. I'm not sure it's necessary. So I certainly wouldn't be approving of that, and I'd be looking at a whole range of other programs along those lines to see where we can cut. Just what is not strictly necessary? What is simply redistribution? What could we say is middle class welfare that we can cut? Whereas, a lot of people are just going to be better off if we give them a tax cut, right? So there's a lot of churn, I think, in the budget. So they're the
I
types of things I'd be doing. I can't, I must confess, I haven't got a well thought out plan for tonight, Bill. Um, but it's got to be cutting taxes and cutting the spending. Whether we have something like a Doge here, I don't know. I mean, I think Elon Musk is. I mean, it's an interesting approach. It's causing a lot. It's causing a lot of issues over there. But at the same time, they've got a major problem with their budget, and they need to do something different than they're doing. And so, I mean, it's an interesting experiment. Let's say that. I think we need to do something similar, not quite the same approach as Doge, but we do need a really rigorous focus on what we're spending money on and seeing what we can cut to save money and deliver tax cuts.
I think it's also interesting. We just had the GST review
Yeah.
and the figures put out, and it seems like and being a West Australian, I have this gripe about GST redistribution as it is. Uh, West Australia was crucified for decades because of the iron ore and that. People thought, no, it's only fair you're getting all that money from iron ore royalties. But I mean, I didn't live there at the time, but I had family there. But the thing was, West Australia, there were so many people going to West Australia from the eastern states to take up jobs in the mining industry and also industries supporting the mining industry. There was a huge influx. So there was tons of pressure on schools, roads, hospitals, and everything else that you get when you get, a couple of 100,000 people coming over every year for several years. And the Commonwealth decides, well, you're getting all that money, you're not going to get the GST. Well, I don't agree with the idea of the GST split in regards to it's supposed to be a replacement for state government taxes, sales tax and things like that is part of it. But the other thing is, I don't believe any state should get anything less than 95% of what it's entitled to or what it's delivered. Um, because all what seems to happen, we give Tasmania something like, I think they're up to about $1.80 something now, for every dollar they have. I think South Australia's $1.38, $1.45. I think it's gone up to. So it's just allowed those states, and I'll call them what they are. They're mendicant states. They would not survive without other states, providing special treatment or the federal government providing special treatment to them. Um, so they're sort of not pulling their weight in their own development sort of thing. I mean, Tasmania's quite closed down just about every other industry you can think of. Good old South Australia blows up coal-fired plants, decides to throw an umbilical cord to Victoria for its energy. It's had the life support of the car industry up until the 90s or the early 2000s. Then it was given the life support of all the shipbuilding in Australia. We've chucked all our DSTO over to Adelaide. So
Mm.
it's basically a Commonwealth propping up their economy. Uh, we're supposed to have had competitive federalism, and I think this goes completely against the grain of competitive federalism.
Yes, look, I think we do need to have a look at that, that what they call a horizontal fiscal equalization. Theoretically, there are some justifications for it, but in practice, it does have that problem you've identified that, well, if you're Tasmania or South Australia, a mendicant state, I think that's the term,
Yeah.
then
Beggars, in other words.
you may not have the incentive. There may not be a strong incentive to develop yourself economically. To get you may as well just you know not yeah, just keep getting the funding from the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth will look after you, or the other states look after you. One thing we should keep in mind, though, is that historically Queensland has, on average, it's we have benefited from the Grants Commission process. So you could say that at one time we were a mendicant state ourselves. So on average, I think our relativity is still above one, but it's only like 2% or something above one. So we've got a, when I last calculated the numbers, since the GST came in, we were about 2% ahead in terms of what we'd get on a equal per capita basis. So we were slightly ahead, but now, I mean, we're getting punished because of those high coal prices we had the last couple of years. So that's going to bring down that even more. So maybe we're getting closer to just being even. WA historically would have been a mendicant state, I imagine, wasn't it? It would have been getting transfers for a significant period until, it developed that iron ore resource and started raking in the money, particularly
That was
since.
before GST and stuff.
Yeah,
Before it was
yeah,
different computer system. It's hard to tell what the overall impact
yeah,
was.
yeah,
But I think the interesting thing is uh, for all the efforts of the then Treasurer Dick and putting up the coal royalties, the super
yeah,
taxes and that. I mean, if anyone knows anything, I've only been in Queensland since about 2012, but the GST rate then for Queensland was about $1.16, and it's
yeah,
gradually come off from $1.09 down to about $1.05 and six, and then
yeah,
we're right, and it's just about out the door now, and so so it's well known to any state government, if you would get massive revenues, you're going to be punished. So
yes,
what the that super tax has done is stop investment and also created a sovereign risk that that our Japanese ambassadors told us, spoke out at least twice on this, warning us that you are taking action that gives a worry to Japanese investors. But they
yeah.
still went ahead of it. And the thing is, it basically comes to naught because the Commonwealth figures out, oh well, you're making all this money, we'll just cut your this other source of money off. So it's sort of
Yeah. It,
it's
it
a bit
it
strange.
it comes to a little bit more than naught. I mean, they do get to keep 20% of it. So how it works is you effectively get to keep your population share of that additional revenue. So like we are giving 80% of it away. It's getting redistributed of that additional money that, that is considered, that's excess money that is available to be redistributed. That's how it works. We do get to keep 20% of it, but yeah, it's a big cost. If you do the cost benefit analysis, okay, so we've trashed our reputation as a stable place to invest. Then Was it worth it to get 20% of that additional revenue? You have to start thinking along those lines. So you're right that a lot of it does end up getting redistributed, but they do get to keep a little bit of it.
I think it's also interesting. It also, besides that, it creates a situation where it doesn't come a problem for a few years down the tracks when a lot of these projects that they're balked at don't
Yeah.
come online. And so it may be 5, 10 years where the supply chain of these projects that would have kept bringing revenue suddenly sort of dry up and there's no more in train. And if you try to reverse it, you've got a 10-year gap before you can get something online to sort of replace that income anyway. So
Yeah.
it's sort of a short-term fix and another big sugar hit for causing another problem. But the other thing is too, other policies that have impacted badly on the economy would, I think one of the major ones would have to be energy. Uh,
Yes.
I'll just chuck up a graph here. This is basically the CPI versus the
Yeah.
electricity price index. And when we had the benefit of cheap electricity, you can see the electricity line indexes below the CPI. So what that had is an effect of keeping a leash on that CPI all the time. So
Mm.
it kept us competitive, and you can see the points in the market where we just completely went stupid. Once we committed to the Kyoto Agreement, then Copenhagen and then the Paris Agreement, it's just skyrocketed, and the separation between electricity and and the CPI is sort of gone out of whack. So
Yeah.
now the electricity price is a net addition to the CPI rather than something that sort of restrains it.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I agree with you. I mean, I used a very similar chart in a paper I wrote with Jared Holland from the Page Research Centre, and he present that was a paper that was presented at the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship conference in London a few weeks ago now. And yeah, we were making the same point that it's it's economic self harm what we've done, and it's interesting the timing of it. It starts taking off around 0708, and that's around the time when the renewable share starts increasing. So it's
The
correlated
cheap
with,
electricity
well, yeah,
generation.
I think we now know that even though yeah, it's cheap in terms of you get your free inputs, but it's not cheap because you've got all the additional transmission infrastructure. You've got to connect it up to the grid, and then you've got the all the additional storage you need to back it up when it because it's so intermittent. It's not that reliable. So I think we're learning that it's not the cheapest form of energy, and we need. I mean, I think we need some of it, right? We want to have more energy. The overwhelming problem we've got a growing economy, growing demand for energy. We want to be an advanced economy. We need to have that energy. Uh, so we need all sources of energy, but we can't just rely on one source like renewables alone. We want renewables, we want more renewables, but we also need to have that reliable power, and that's why. I mean, I don't know if nuclear is the answer, but at least it's at least he's sort of Dutton's come up with something that is has some reasonable chance of having very low emissions and also having reliable power. You can argue about the cost, but I think at least we're having a more sensible debate if we're starting to think about nuclear being potentially part of that mix.
No, I still think it's a matter of going back to conversation and let's have some real debate over climate change and trying to get rid of this idea that plant food is going to boil the planet. But we don't but because they're saying that that's settled science, we don't seem to be able to have that debate. Uh, but we just know that Donald Trump being elected in the United States is really throwing a few curveballs right across the globe, and everyone's getting their feathers ruffled, especially things on tariffs and things like that. Well, I think the reality is our aluminium industry and our steel industry as exports don't even account for $1 billion compared to coal, hundreds of millions of dollars, and same for iron ore. It's a spit in the ocean sort of thing, but we're getting all hot under the collar. And the other thing is, well, we don't really make it at competitive rates in a lot of cases now with our electricity going up.
Yep. Yeah. Look, I agree. I think I think that should be that will be one of the big issues for the election because the government is vulnerable because it committed to what is it, $275 off the power bills, and I mean clearly that's not what's happened. So I mean it's offering it'll roll over that $300 rebate that the federal government's offering, but everyone knows that I mean we're paying for that ourselves, aren't we? So and still bills have gone up from where they were, so it's not really solving the problem. It's not achieving the government's commitment to have $275 off the electricity price. It's so it's very vulnerable there. That's going to be one of the bigger issues, that cost of energy, because it is, yeah, I think it is something that people know. Yeah, it does affect their living standards, and people have felt the pain.
Do you think they can get around that by simply, it's like the Queensland gave us $1,000 rebate, and I think the Feds threw in a $300 rebate not so long ago. I know that I know our household hasn't paid an electricity bill for about 18 months because
Mm,
it's still got these credits between having solar on the roof and the two lots of the Fed and the state government thing.
yeah.
Do you think they can sort of make people just forget about that when it comes to when they go into the ballot box if they sort of uh, grease the palm with a, say, $1,000 rebate?
Oh, well, I mean, the Queensland government did that. The federal government won't have the capacity to do that at a national level. I mean, who knows? I could be wrong, but I'd be very surprised to see that in the budget next week. That would just be, a colossal amount of money nationwide, and it'd just look like an outright bribe. And I don't think, I mean, Jim Chalmers he's a good communicator, but I don't even think he could spin that to say that that was justifiable expenditure. I think they would just be laughed at. They wouldn't be taken seriously. So I don't think they can do something that large. I mean, Cameron Dick did it here in Queensland. I thought that was pretty outrageous. And it's so poorly targeted, right? I mean, I'm like you. I haven't paid an electricity bill in a while, and I mean, I don't think it's well targeted going to me, but yet I get the benefit as well. So yeah, really bad policy in my view.
Okay. As we go into the election, who do you think's got the wood, and what when it comes to the budget? And do you think Dutton can deliver something in his reply speech that can sort of put them in better stead once the budget's delivered? How often has the opposition, sort of puts the kibosh on the government? How often does that happen?
Look, I don't know how much attention is paid to budget reply speeches, really, or how significant they are. Um, and I'm not sure that will win Dutton the election anyway. I think it's going to be a vote on the government, on their competence, how they're performing, whether they think Dutton looks credible or not. I think I don't know whether anything he announces in the budget reply speech will affect that. I think the nuclear policy is something that people will look at Dutton. They'll think, okay, is this legitimate? What do we think about this? And also they'll be thinking about, is he credible? Can we trust him? I don't know whether any specific policies in the budget reply speech will change things much. I know he had that business lunch tax policy that he's already announced. I think that's popular in the business community. I think that could get him some votes. I don't think it's good policy, but it's going to be popular with business people. I think it'll be good for hospitality. Um, yeah, I think that it's going to be a referendum or a vote on the government, really, on their competence. And I think the government has a lot of challenges because of that cost of living issue that we've been talking about. And that's why we'll see what Jim Chalmers is able to deliver and whether he's able to say this is uh, responsible policy, whether he can justify additional spending. I think there's going to be a limit to what he can do. So yeah, I'm not sure that the budget reply speech will be of much great uh, will have significant implications for the election. Personally,
Do you think the old Medicare scare will be rolled out again by the Labor? Those
possibly.
tried and tested sort of things.
I don't know how effective it is really. I mean, they Dutton just has to say I won't touch Medicare. I know Abbott said the same thing, and then he tried to introduce a co-payment. So maybe it will be effective. Well, I'm not really a political strategist, uh, but yeah, I mean, I just think it's going to be a referendum on the government and how effective they've been, and I think people will be thinking, okay, how have the last 3 years gone? Does the government really have a plan to make things better? Are we willing to give Dutton a go? And it's hard to know what the judgment is. I mean, it's hard in opposition, and uh, I mean, Mark Latham looked strong for a while, but then ultimately people made a judgment at the last minute. Oh, I'm not sure we can trust him, and they didn't vote for him. I mean, who knows? Same thing could happen with Peter Dutton. At the moment, I mean, the federal government will lose a significant number of seats. I think most likely outcome, if I was going to put any money on the election, I'd be betting on a minority government. I think Labor possibly scraping back in with the support of the Teals and Greens, perhaps, although Greens will lose some seats themselves. There's a there's some chance there could be a change of government if there's a big swing, if Dutton can mount a great campaign, if he can show himself as credible. And if Albanese I mean, Albanese could always have a shocker of a campaign. He actually had a pretty bad campaign in 2022, I thought, with the gaff over the unemployment rate. But he ended
Like
up,
he's not one really on facts and figures and having everything in his sort of at his lip sort of thing when it comes to
yeah,
any detail.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's why I think they'll use Chalmers a lot more because he's a much better communicator. Uh, yeah, look, I honestly don't know. I'm guessing that Labor will suffer because people are suffering and they're mad about cost of living, and so they're going to punish the government. Poss- I think they'll punish them enough well, they won't punish them enough that they'll lose government. I suspect. I think they'll just hold on because it's a monumental challenge for Dutton to win enough seats to become PM. I
Just
mean, what do
on
you think, Bill?
well, I think Dutton's probably shooting himself in the foot every time he opens his mouth.
Mm,
Like with this thing about a referendum to throw people out. I mean, you don't need to wind that sort of situation into the conversation at this stage in time. That's something that could be well left on the back burner for a government to deal with, not a referendum. I don't believe it's a referendum item at all. It's just like focusing on the fact that the governments are too, the ministers and the politicians are too weak to do the job, uh,
yeah,
and sort of looking, well, let's get ourselves behind the parapet by putting the people out there in front to build the wall. So,
yeah,
and it's just a stupid, just don't unnecessary thing. And again, Australians want laws and that for everyone. They don't want more laws and that looks after one person or group or another. Our laws should be strong enough that if someone's doing harm or hate or something like just the universal laws that we've got, should be sufficient. We shouldn't have to have laws directed at or addressing any section of the population. I think that's a sign of a weakness. I think the other thing is, I think he shot himself in the foot with most of the core people of Liberals. I class myself in that. I mean, I'm a disaffected Liberal voter from the day Abbott got stabbed. they'll never get my first preference on that basis alone. But he's going down the same track with energy. He's still committing to net zero. He's still committing us to renewables, because the more time he talks up about nuclear, that's 10, 20 years away, before this first power. So that means in those 20 years, you've got to keep going with the stupid renewables things that's driving up the prices. He just needs to say, it's strange because Trump gave him an out. He could have said, well, seeing that the United States is pulling out of Paris, we need to review the situation, so we're going to put things on hold at least, rather than saying, the next day, so no, we're committed to net zero and Paris and staying in the Paris Agreement. I think he lost tons of people in regards to his core constituents over that fact alone. So I think he's not doing the right thing to going back to core Menzies type values and that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting perspective, Bill. I mean, it's net zero. I mean, we're not going to get anywhere near it, right, as a globe. So maybe there's no point having a policy. Uh, yeah.
Just on
Yeah.
one last note before we wind up,
Yeah.
sticking with the treasury, the budget type thing.
Yes.
Do you think it's getting to a stage where people are starting to take note of the ever increasing forward estimated debts? We used to have surplus budgets and we used to have very small. Howard worked hard to get back the bounce of our economy in regards to the debt that the Keating government put up. But we've never got it under control, since the Howard era. It just keeps creeping up. Do you think at some point in time that the national debt and all the state debts, Victoria's a classic case, Queensland's heading the same, this accumulated mass debt, do you think it's got to sometime register in with the general people realising, yeah, it doesn't affect me at this moment, but it's going to affect my children or children? Do you think it will ever become an issue at the ballot box, or we're just not attuned to that?
Well, I think it should be, but I think it just doesn't have the impact that it once did, that it did, say, in the 1990s or the 2000s. Maybe it's a different generation. And look, I mean, in international comparisons, I mean, if you look at the debt, public sector debt around the world, I mean, Australia looks relatively favourable compared to other countries. So maybe that's an issue too. What I would say, Bill, is that I think there are impacts of the debt that are affecting, it is affecting the lives of people already. It's affecting the ability of governments to deliver public services, because they've got to pay the bondholders, right? They've got to pay the interest expenses on the debt. I can't remember the exact figure in the federal budget, but we're getting up, 20, 30 billion in general government interest expenses, it must be, on that debt that we've got. And that's money you can't spend on health or education. State government, $6 billion or $7 billion in interest expenses. That's money you can't spend on health and education. In the old sort of, and this was in Queensland, I think we talked about this last time I was on the show. I remember the time when Queensland had very strict financial management and was both Labor and Conservative. So the Goss government was extremely conservative in their fiscal, in their budget management. And also early Beattie was, they sort of lost discipline toward the end of Beattie, and then in Bligh, they just got rid of it completely. But at one time, we had under $200 million in interest expenses on debt in Queensland. Okay, so it was a very small, very tiny part of the budget, and now it's up to, it's getting up to $6 billion or in the forward estimate. So we've had this big blowout in the, what we're having to pay the bondholders, and that means we can't spend on health and education. I think and because we've got all these debt servicing costs, that means we can't deliver public services to the level that the community needs. That's going to be affecting people's well-being, their confidence in the government to deliver. So I think it is having real consequences, even if people aren't sort of thinking about, oh, well, there's all this federal debt, there's $1 trillion and more of federal debt. Uh, Maybe that's not sort of registering, but I think people know that government isn't working as well as it should be. And I think part of the story is that they're having to pay all this money on debt service.
Do you think maybe because people are so flippant, $1,000 here, a million, a trillion, or whatever, $100 million debt, but maybe if the language was saying, well, we're going to, the debt is equivalent to 50, 50 schools not being built, 100 kilometres
Yeah,
of railway line.
yeah.
Do you think we need to paint the picture differently rather than this, just big round numbers of trillions or hundreds of millions and that, and put it down into each community is not going to get a new school because we've got to pay the debt, or
Yeah.
we're not going to get so many potholes fixed, or something like. Do we have to put it in those sort of tangible measures to make people realise it is a problem rather than just casually going off your lips? $100 million debt, or two or three $100 billion debt, or heading towards a trillion. I mean, it's just numbers, but you
Yeah.
need to fix it into some sort of things that they're going to miss out on and their children are going to miss out on.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Bill. I like it. I think that's a good idea. I think I've seen examples of that. I did something like that in a op-ed I wrote for the Daily Telegraph. They were interested in how much state governments were earning out of royalties from coal and gas, and so I wrote a piece for them, and I said, well, okay, this is what that is in hospitals or schools. So that's something I did in that op-ed. So I think, yeah, that's potentially, that's a good idea. Bill, I'm going to have to hop off soon.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. Well, I'll just wind up now. If you just hold on for a sec, I'll just introduce next week's or tomorrow night's
great.
guest, and just say goodbye on the other side of this. Okay. Look, Gene, thanks very much for your time tonight. Really appreciate it. If you enjoyed tonight's show, please like, share, and subscribe to our Facebook page and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Tomorrow night I'll be back on air. I'll be with uh, Richard Seni. He's an engineer, a civil engineer, and we'll be talking about Vertican Dam Stage 2 and adding another dimension to that in regards to pumped hydro by building a smaller dam downstream. So we'll talk to Dick tomorrow night. So please join me then. Thank you.
Okay.